Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session, The Future of Content Creation. It is amazing to see so many of you today. It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you for joining us. My name is Gemma, and I'm from the Expo North Digital team. Expo North Digital is Highlands and Islands Enterprises mechanism for specialist digital support for the creative and heritage economies across the Highlands and Islands region, and the project is delivered by Ironworks Venue. This workshop is part of HIE's Northern Innovation Hub, designed to build on and accelerate business innovation. It is funded through the Inverness and Highland City Region deal, a joint initiative supported by £315 million of investment from the UK and Scottish governments, Highland Council, HIE and UHI. If you have any questions throughout today's session, please pop them in the chat box. I'm now going to pass over to Jessica Fox, who is our fabulous film and broadcasting specialist from the Expo North Digital team.
Thanks so much, Gemma. That was awesome. It is really wonderful to see so many of you here today. We are going to you live from Blazing Griffin offices, which is, I have Naysun here to my right, and I also have Noah here. And before they introduce themselves, this is all about the future of content creation. I am really curious. I see some very familiar names, and I know we have some amazing content creators in the audience. There's a reaction button at the bottom of your screen. And I was just curious, could you raise your hand if you are currently a content creator, a filmmaker and or producer? I'm just curious. Yes. Okay. And also, can you then, thank you so much. That's super interesting. Can you raise your hand if you are a writer? Any writers in the audience? Great. And then can you raise your hand if you're involved in production at all? Anybody currently involved? Great. Thank you so much. That's super interesting. So unmuting me. We're talking all about the future of content creation today. And really, thank you so much for joining us. It will be about an hour and we will have time at the end for questions. So Naysun and Noah, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? We'll begin, Noah, we'll begin with you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, I'm Noah. I work as a development executive on the international studios team at Reich Media Partners. Reich started in the pandemic. A bunch of the biggest agents in Hollywood who had previously been at CAA, WME, UTA, all banded together and left to start a new management company. So started in the chaos of pandemic era and took with them clients ranging from Bradley Cooper to Luca Guadagnino and Joe Barton and et cetera, big name actors, writers, directors, and everything in between. And they built a studio team out of that in the States and in the UK, and the UK team is what I obviously work on, where we have an ability to develop and produce stuff that has an access point to a high level of talent internally, meaning that the ambition, scale, size, budgets of the kind of stuff that we are excited about or looking for, trying to build, can be a little bit more elevated, bigger scale than your everyday British independent company is able to because of the access point. So that's what I do.
So much
yes, a lot in-house, and through the connectivity of where the powers that be in LA have been in the past. They have an amazing kind of nexus of contacts that cut through what is usually quite a slow process of attaching writers, directors, stars to projects, and makes a development process from my side more directed and focused, and with a pathway to production inbuilt in a development process from an earlier stage than is usually possible. So that's my job, is to identify writers, ideas, stories, pieces of IP, anything that we can build in an exciting way at Reich. I also produce my own stuff on the side outside of work and have done a few shorts with BFI and Film4, etc., and have a first feature with Film4.
Oh, that's so exciting. You're a busy guy and you have a busy guy and you have a great job. So, okay. Thank you so much, Noah. Naysun, can you tell us a little bit about where we are, who you are, and what we do?
Yes, so we're in one of the boardrooms at Blazing Griffin. We're a media company based in Glasgow in Scotland. We are a kind of mini group that started in 2015. We work across video game development, where we make in-house our own games. We have a film and TV production team. We develop and produce film and television. And then we also have a post-production facility, which is the floor that we're on at the moment, which is all about helping other people craft their stories as well through kind of end-to-end post-production in editing and sound and picture. And yeah, so
That's
yeah,
really cool.
we're sort of at the playing in similar places, but the opposite end of I guess the starting point from Noah. So hopefully it'll be an interesting discussion, because we started going, we have nothing, we have no access, we know no one, we have no capital. How do we do what we want to do in terms of the stories that we want to tell from Scotland, and be able to tell them globally, which is a journey that we're still on, I'd say,
Wow,
to achieve. But yeah.
And you've been in existence how long?
8 years now, doing what we're doing.
That's
yeah.
awesome. And for what's on, to give people a sense of how busy you are as well, can you tell us a little bit about just a broad picture of what's on your slate?
Yes. So on the video game side, we recently released the second in our series of Poirot video games. We worked with the Ivor Christie Estates and Microids, French video game publisher. And we're now working on the next in our murder mystery series with them. We have a couple of AR video games that have soon to be released as well, with a new AR platform, and just a series of other things that unfortunately I can't talk about publicly, but including one quite exciting action adventure video game that we're working with an actor on developing, and kind of bringing a bit of cinematic storytelling to video games. And then on our film and television side, the types of things that are currently on the slate are just a mix of kind of domestic and international projects. We have one musical comedy with 5th season that we're developing. We've got a period piece set in Hong Kong with the BBC and Universal that we're working on, and yeah,
All kinds of
many other things. And then yeah, and on post-production, we work with everyone. We're currently the team's working very hard on the Tattooist of Auschwitz, which is Sky's big flagship show, and is very topical at the moment, and yeah, many other projects.
Amazing. Yeah. And Noah, can you tell us a little bit, without breaching any issues with IP, because we are being recorded, tell us a little bit about, because it's amazing to hear how many projects are going on. Are you balancing all those projects kind of too? As many
yes. On your... there's really unfortunately little that I can talk about, because it's a new company. We're at the start of building everything out. The two things that have been publicly announced are our show Lazarus with Apple in the US with Tom Hardy and Zazie Beetz, and a novel that we're adapting called Happy Head that we are producing with Taron Egerton. So those are two very active one film, one TV project, but they give a good flavor of the kind of stuff that we're building internally in terms of big names with distinctive and contemporary material to try and make stuff for a very international marketplace.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so I know a lot of people in this audience are thinking, like, either they have an idea or they have a script, and at the very first start, how do you identify for both your companies what a good idea is? So how do you get that sense of, yes, I know my market, or I know I can sell this? Tell me a little bit about that process.
Should I go first? I think working in the British film and TV industry, and I come from indie British film world before this strange glossy American job. My experience of British film and TV is that what isn't maybe considered enough in a development process is an audience. I tend to think of making stuff, because making stuff takes a lot of money, time, energy, effort on a lot of people's part. that if you don't have any kind of audience in mind, it's a little bit like a tree falling in a forest and whether it made a sound. And I think that's something that maybe we don't consider enough when we're building stories and ideas and concepts, books, or whatever it is in this country, is that we can tend to be a little chip on our shoulder small. And the kind of stuff that I get really excited about and the kind of writers at early stages, the kind of voices, the kind of short films, whatever it is, are things that are almost naively ambitious, that don't really take notice of what's happening in the British marketplace and actually just make the thing that someone wanted to make if all things were equal. Those are the kind of voices that usually make me take notice when I'm reading a sample from an agent or something like that, is stuff that feels, just more international in the sense of having a accessibility point to a bigger audience. There's a real, obviously, always beauty in domestic simplicity, but I think the best voices are allow themselves to speak in a wider way, in a more universal way through specific stories. So things that manage to balance those things with a contemporary relevance, a sense of ambition, and that intangible uniqueness of a voice, that's what I'm often looking for.
Woo, that's very articulate. I love that, because it's cross on genre. It takes account of your own interests, but also you're making something very tangible. It's like very clear what some of the parameters are. That's really excellent. And so when you are not just an individual working in a company, but have an entire company, how do you stress test an idea? What are you looking for?
I mean, there's a lot of what Noah says really resonates. I guess because we operate in a few different fields, and we try to balance our slate according to the kind of opportunities that to sell, and it is ultimately selling. We're creating something that someone somewhere has to buy, as Noah says. Like, think about the audience. It's incredibly important. And then you have to not only think about the audience, but you have to think about the people who think they know the audience. Because we're not selling most of the time directly to those people. We're selling to the people who think they understand what that audience wants. And sometimes those two things are not directly aligned. Sometimes they are, but not always. And so and this is something that I think really comes from, at least for me, comes from time. There's a bit of intangibility to building a sense of instinct around what it is people are looking for in those positions. And that means getting out there. It means talking to people. It means building up that instinct over time and over, attending briefings, and which tend to not tell you actually what will be bought. But they help build up your sense of the thing that could achieve success. But then beyond that, for us specifically, I guess, as I say, we look for a kind of balanced slate, because we kind of have to be a little bit opportunistic. And so one of the things we love is worlds that can be played in, not just individual plots. It has to be a brilliant story, but that inhabits a world that could be then explored in lots of different ways, whether it's a video game or a comic or whatever, or a different geography around the world. So that's on one end. On the other end, we're also looking for stories that is a very positive trend in media in the UK, and I think globally they're looking for voices that haven't been listened to or haven't been heard. And so finding those people who have something that speaks to a universality of the human experience, but is very specific to where that person is from or where their background is it's a really exciting trend in the industry. So that's something that I think anyone from any background can really take to heart, and that can work at any budget level. And I think that's also what's very exciting, is that something that you can take to BBC Scotland and do for a relatively modest budget, make something absolutely brilliant. Or it's something that actually could get snapped up by a big studio potentially. And then I guess the last thing I'll say on that is that we also try to look at, it's a little reductive, but it's I think it's what Noah alluded to as well, is the balance of something that and is familiar with a little bit of something different. And we try to break that, it's a little bit made up to put in percentages, but say like 85% familiar, and then 15% like you've never come across. And there's actually a little bit of science behind that in terms of how people's brains work and how audiences' brains work. And there's a science to how you, and an art to how you work within that, within your story as well. But that's definitely something that we're a fan of. And the last thing is, just for us personally, we love genre. We love heartfelt genre, and that's not something that we can stick to 100% of the time, because we're very much dictated to by market forces, but it's what we personally love.
For folks who might not know what that means, like genre as in romance, as in zombie movie.
Yeah, you know, traditionally genre means horror, but actually we look at it a little bit more broadly. It is something that is exactly as you say, is when you say it is defined by a genre, whereas a drama might be defined, you have to say the plot to be able to understand what it is. A genre film in the way that we define it is like, okay, so it's a rom-com. Tell me a little bit about that. Okay, so it's a horror film. It's an action film. I mean, I'd say we trend towards the horror, the thriller, the action, to an extent, but we're still more broad than that.
I think it's so interesting too, because from a writer's perspective, you're totally right. From selling a story, you want to connect to an audience, you need to know who your audience is. From a writer's perspective, it's so hard to second guess what people want, and you're supposed to be true to your own voice. So there is a great quote by Joseph Campbell that I keep on coming back to for any writers that we have in the audience, and I know some of you raised your hand, where he says that he thinks people are always searching for a meaning to life, and that's not what he thinks we're searching for. He thinks we're searching for the experience of being alive, and that's what stories put us in touch with. So when you talk about resonating with an audience and like stories with a little bit of a twist, or big stories with theme, like a universal theme, but a unique story, I always think that idea of the experience of being alive. I think it's really interesting, Noah and Naysun, you both are working within companies that have multiple layers to them, so that you can go and develop a project and it can build out into worlds, it can build out into a game, you can sell it as a TV show. Noah, as you said, like you can be a little bit more ambitious because it's like an in-house thing where you can attach actors maybe and develop it a little bit further or bigger. Do challenges come with that? So if you were going to make yourself a little vulnerable and talk about like maybe one major challenge that frustrates you or that you think is worth people knowing or tackling, or what is one thing to come to mind? It could be a post-COVID thing. Like what's a current challenge for the industry?
I would say that the obsession with intellectual property is a big challenge for the industry, because it's the, you know, in a certain sense, it's the death of originality, it's the death of original ideas, it's the killing of the notion that you know, new writers can come up with random ideas and write a script and get them made. It isn't as simple as that, because people want to have books, podcasts, games to base their creation on. The way of, I guess, like people are circumnavigating that, and I think maybe Naysun can speak to this a little bit more, but in a world in which the studios require often IP behind bigger, more ambitious ideas, there are ways in which really smart people who have foresight are creating their own IP that they can then sell. The really interesting thing on my side is, you know, in all of my last 3 jobs, I've worked with book scouts who get manuscripts of books 2-3 years before publication, some of which turn into the most insanely overinflated bidding wars between different companies to prices that you literally wouldn't believe for a book 2.5 years before publication, often from an entirely new writer that has no inbuilt audience and actually only matters because it's a piece of IP, so to speak. So I think that's a massive challenge for everyone, is seeing the wood from the trees in a sense, and trying to maintain a sense of wanting to make original, distinctive, good art, rather than just needing to leech onto whatever piece of material already exists out there. And the clever people, the people who are you know, more worldly and have a more of a holistic understanding of how that trend is going, are managing to find smart ways of creating the same brilliant ideas making them into IP and then being able to do the same thing with them that they otherwise would have anyway, in a sense, kind of Trojan horsing the studios or the powers that be into buying the same thing that they would have anyway. That's
so clever. And is this just for, again, the layman who might not understand why IP would pre-existing IP would be important to studios? This is about audience, isn't it? It's to show that an audience already exists and are hungry for the kind of story that you're...
I think that's where it started. Honestly, I think it's become totally divorced from that. And that's why I think the challenge exists, is that people are buying books for extortionate prices 2 years before they have an audience, in the guess that they might have an audience when they come out. But actually, if they don't, it doesn't really matter anyway, because at least it's based on something, which I think is basically a race to the bottom. Honestly, that's how I see it. But you know, people are scrambling to try and find ways in a shrinking marketplace of getting things through, and that's one of the ways that they're doing it, is making sure it's based on a piece of material. And I think that's a shame, but given that's the context, I'm always trying to figure out ways of best navigating that.
Let's say, yeah, I know someone who has a sort of podcast distribution company, and they were very surprised to find that metrics didn't have that much to do with the most popular approaches that they had for optioning podcasts, because that is a place where people will go to find ideas from. But it wasn't that they were like, oh great, this podcast has 3 million listeners every month, and therefore that's the one that's valuable. It was like, oh, I listened to this really random one and I'm an executive and I just loved it, and so I'm going to go after that one, and it had 12 people listening to it, but because it existed, it crystallized it. And I think part of it, you know, Noah, you spoke to it really well. I think there's a risk-averse nature as well to individuals in companies, where they will, if something doesn't work out, you want to be able to say, well, that wasn't because I made the wrong choice that it didn't work out. So I found an IP, it existed, it was great. And this doesn't apply for preprint novels, but it applies to things more generally. It's like, well, look, everything that needed was the recipe for success. I managed to bring into this company. So if it didn't work out as a great TV show or film, then it's not actually anything to do with what the choices that I made along the way. And I think you can find in the way that kind of big conglomerates are structured sometimes, some very brilliant people who have to work to protect how they operate within that structure. Which is totally rational and makes sense. But anyway, sorry, that was just something that sparked when you were speaking, Noah. But the one thing I think is a particular challenge for us right now is operating in a market where no one knows where it's going for the next 5 years or beyond, and no one's ever really known that. But I think there's a clearly things are still getting made and people are making decisions, but there's a when you're an independent, and we rely on quite, you know, sometimes I wouldn't call them innovative funding models, but they're not just a single buyer coming in and buying something from you. You're convincing people and many parties to put together a little bit of funding from lots of different types of things and across different range of media. And when there's a great deal of uncertainty of how distribution's going to work, how platforms are going to consolidate or not, how as Generation Alpha becomes consuming generation, as in a fee-paying generation, not just a passive consumer, what choices they're going to start to make. All of that leads to not a paralysis, but definitely a bit of a slowdown, especially when it comes to risk-taking. And that can be risk-taking creatively, and that's what we're seeing a lot. And I think the irony of that is that you're creating a bored audience, as we're seeing. We're milking them, and it actually is increasing risk when it comes in some ways when it comes to making sure that you have an audience, because we're just ringing everyone for everything that they're worth and making them really bored of the stuff that we're putting out there.
Absolutely.
So it can become a bit self-defeating, but I don't really know what the answer is.
Just described how I feel about Netflix right now. I keep on looking for something to watch. I'm addicted to watching it and I'm bored. That's that's so interesting. So does it matter where you are? Because we're sitting here in Glasgow. I think it's extraordinary that you've built Blazing Griffin with amazing things that you're doing. We talked earlier about how actually you're competing with London in terms of some of the things you're bringing on in your post-production facilities. No, you're in London. I know we have people zooming in from all over the place. I represent the Highlands and Islands. Does it matter where you are when it comes to selling content, generating content? Does it still matter in this post-COVID world?
I think inevitably the centers of power tend to be London, LA, New York. But I think what Naysun's done with films like Anna and the Apocalypse, maybe you can speak a bit more to that, Naysun, but is a brilliant recent example of something that is ambitious in its storytelling from a particular point of view that manages to reach an audience because it has an audience in mind the entire way through. That's the best of what regional domestic filmmaking can be. Obviously it doesn't always have to be that, but I obviously great stories can come from anywhere. The BBC are doing a massive effort to make more regional content at the moment, which is fantastic. There are loads more productions coming out of areas, places, towns, cities that we haven't seen them in before. My fear always with that stuff is that it's temporary plaster work to a more endemic, holistically biased system, to be totally honest. And I think these things can come in very, very short waves, like a slew of commissions over a couple of years that then reverts back to metropolitan centers thereafter. But that's just my maybe glass half empty pessimism speaking. But I think there is definitely, particularly at this moment, a real opportunity for those places that have those ideas, that have a specificity of place, a specificity of locale, to resonate particularly with domestic broadcasters, maybe less so with the international marketplace, to be totally frank. I think small town America has an international appeal in a way that small town Britain sadly doesn't. I don't know whether it's accents, I don't know what it is, it just seems to be a fact. British film, I think, accounted for 3.7% of worldwide receipts over the last year, which is not nearly as much as it should be given the amount of and the scale that we are making films at. And I think that speaks to, as I was saying, the idea that we should be trying to really focus and think about those audiences from an early stage. Sorry, I'm not sure how.
No, that's great. Thank you. Noah, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say the fits and starts and sometimes circular progress I think that we make with focus on regional storytelling is really true. I guess I overall agree with your kind of glass half empty sort of description of it, but I think the general trend, which isn't maybe helpful for us as individuals here, but the general trend across decades is the positive one. Okay. But slow moving, glacial, but there are moments that one can take advantage of within there. And I think that is important. I think being in a region, we have to be looking globally, and that is just the downside we have in the UK and in Scotland is that because we're English language, we are competing against America. We don't have an inbuilt audience for British films. We do to an extent for British television, although we have few buyers, a very limited number of buyers for British TV. Whereas a French film has an inbuilt audience for French language film and beyond France as well. But it's also a benefit, potentially, if you take a global outlook, you think about your American market, your other English language markets, and you try to build a story to be able to play in there, because it is still the biggest language market, sometimes competing with Mandarin, but it's still the most established one, and it can be an opportunity, but it does, again, just saying what you're saying, Noah, but thinking about your audience. But I think if you want to work in the creative industries, you can't help but remember an old colleague described it. beautifully, a psychotic optimist. You have to believe that these things are possible.
Yeah.
And because your belief that something is possible is the thing that makes other people believe that it's possible. And that is anyone along the kind of value power chain. It's, you know, you're creating something from nothing.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I remember in the wake of I May Destroy You, which obviously was like a phenomenal singular piece of work in the British landscape over my lifetime, without doubt. Talking to so many commissioners, producers, execs in the couple of weeks after that series was on, or in the time that was on, going, God, I wish I'd made that. And really knowing that none of them would have. And I think that that ability to be the person who isn't just like talking a talk, but is genuinely commissioning, empowering, putting money and effort and people and resources behind voices that you just simply believe in, despite what the market is telling you, is always such a valuable thing. And without those people who are in positions of power doing that, then we would not be making the slow process that Naysun's talking about. Like you need stakeholders and you know, people who have genuine power to be forward thinking enough to do that. And you know, sometimes my pessimism comes from not thinking that there are enough of those people, probably, and that we will need a generation shift over the next however many years for the younger generation to have positions of power, so that idea of a repeated status quo is somewhat outdated, and more distinctive, different, structurally revolutionary pieces of work can be commissioned and made.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And, you know, one thing also about geography too is the happy accidents, or the serendipity doesn't exist where you're able to network in the same way. I can't just meet you guys at a bar or a meeting, or the same way in LA, you could just run into someone. And so, I mean, that's so...
Just the number of stories I've heard about people in LA being like, oh, we were just at the tennis club together.
Yeah.
And that's
this will sound utterly ludicrous, but our new offices are in Shoreditch, and it's not next to Soho, and that's you know, in tiny London bubble, that feels like we're a little bit outside of where everyone else is. So, you know, that's still true.
Yeah, and it's so hard. I think this is why Expo North Digital really values events like this, because everybody is in one room from very different places. You two are in completely different places right now. So while we have you two in the same room, let's say we're all accidentally meeting at this is a coffee shop, what kinds of advice would you give folks who did want to pitch to you? So if you're going to receive something by email, or you're going to be accosted in a coffee shop, or you're actually going to have a meeting, if someone's going to take the effort and time to meet with you and you're going to give them some attention, what advice can you give them so that they're best prepared to do that?
I mean, generally, this is the most obvious thing to say, but just because of the volume of incoming that we have, we generally need it to be coming through official sources.
That's good advice.
Channels, agents, lawyers, etc. Obviously, if people have made brilliant short films and are unrepresented, then I take that really seriously. And if people have made a script and keep badgering me, I will probably eventually read it. But ideally, that just allows me to, legally as much as anything else, like give something a look. You know, good idea, like things surprise you all the time. I often go into a read with no expectation, with like probably internal prejudice about where something's come from, etc., etc. I don't know, it's hard to tell, but really often you'll start reading something and within the first 2 pages, 3 pages, I will instinctively know that there's a really exciting voice there. So I guess in that vein, the best thing I think that someone can do is try to make their specificity and distinctiveness of the voice clear as early on in the writing as possible. I'll really often, like, just to be totally frank, not get to page 10 of something if it isn't there, and if I don't feel it, because life's too short. So trying to really make yourself make your personality sing off a page as early as possible in a script, like 99 times out of 100, I can tell after 2 pages if I like something.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I know this sounds like a weird thing to highlight, but you mentioned like a lawyer. Do lawyers represent people too? Like if a lawyer sends you in something, is that legit or not? Really?
Honestly, I'm just I'm repeating party line, and I'm not sure actually what
what the protocol is. Interesting.
We get things submitted from US lawyers, not from British lawyers, or not usually, sometimes, but much more rarely. Yeah.
Sometimes US writers will just have a lawyer rather than an agent and a manager, so I think it's more that.
Okay. Thank you. No, thank you. And what about you guys? Do you find that you get a lot of people knocking on your door because you are in Scotland and they're excited you're here?
I mean, I guess I don't have a point of comparison, so I don't know how relatively to others, but I mean, look, from a legal position, coming from a rep is important.
Why is that? Just again for the layman, why is it important to have from a legal point of view?
Because at any given time you're developing, you could have 20 or 30 projects, or you could have had, and including ones in the past, and you can run into trouble when you've had something submitted and read that's very similar to something that you currently have on the slate.
Understood.
And that and you just don't want to.
Yeah, but you can do all these things with other things.
Oh, I think someone accidentally has their mic on. Hold on. No, not anymore. Okay.
But is one aspect of it, and the other aspect is volume.
Yeah,
it costs us money, and when money's tight, that means it costs people, it costs their time, and how to be able to get through it. And unfortunately, one way of limiting it is for people who have representation. That being said, echoing Noah again, sorry, I feel like I'm just doing that this whole time, but short films are great.
Yeah.
Short films like show, I mean, they just show you, what someone is capable of doing, whether it's writing becoming something real, or directing ability, or just gumption, which in the creative industries is probably like number one. Can you get something off the ground? And again, because the basic test in the creative industries is, can you create something from nothing? And can you convince people to come along with you on that ride? And so having created something is great. It doesn't have to necessarily be related to the project we want to then talk about, but just showing that you've been able to go on that journey is fantastic. And these days it is, to an extent, easier. You can make it on your phone, you can make it and actually the way it looks isn't necessarily that important. I always go to It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, one of my favorite TV programs, and it was a bunch of friends in a bar with a DV camera. It looked terrible in 4:3, but the writing, the performances shone through, and it became one of the biggest comedy shows. So that's one thing, and just to the point of when you actually get to the point of reading something that we find, we should do this ourselves in a development process, but a lot of the time people will leave the really interesting things for episode 2. And I'm talking about TV specifically. And so much of the development process is actually being like, actually bring that forward in episode 1, which is when you want to grab your audience. And that's something to think about is if you are a TV writer, an aspiring TV writer, just making sure you're telling us in episode 1 giving us the reasons why we should be continuing watching in that episode. And as I say, we still do that through the development process ourselves, and then go, actually, wait, we need to bring a lot of these things forward, or a commissioner will tell us that. But that just one little bit of advice I give on the creative side as well.
That's such a good point. That happens all the time. And also to illustrate your point, I'm sitting here and I know Naysun because of a YouTube series that we did a long way back that we had met about, or his team about. So it does putting your work out there, even if it's not visually perfect, where either writing or acting or concept can shine. And that goes back to your point about there's some really clever people out there who are getting their IP and their audience built regardless. and then building up from there. Before we turn it over, I really appreciate both your time and your honesty and your wisdom. Before we turn it over to the audience for questions, I know no one has a magic ball, but both of you are very smart. And we've gone through a pandemic, we've gone through a writer's strike, we've gone through an actor strike. What does the future look like? What are you bracing for? I know you said no one knows for the next 5 years, but let's just say for the next year or two, are people going to be dropping content? Is there going to be less content made? Is there going to be more content made? Are people going to be genre hungry? Is the world so bleak right now? Do you think rom-coms are going to, like, what is one thing you can see in a little crystal ball? We won't hold you to it, but just an instinct. What do you think?
I think you're going to see consolidation, and not just necessarily corporate consolidation, but you're going to see payment consolidation. So bundling coming back in a big way. I mean, yeah, I think, I don't know. And that may change the dynamic, because if bundling comes back in, then people aren't going to be competing for subscribers. They're going to be competing for viewers again. And that's something to know about the last few years in subscription world. It has been as much about new subscribers as it's been about actual eyeballs in any given show. And that means shows are doing a different thing. The thing that they're looking for shows that get you to come in to begin with. But as AVOD starts as advertising video on demand, so that's paid for by advertising, it's paid for by eyeballs, not by subscriptions. And when I'm paying, whatever, with the cost of living, maybe £200 a month for my cable-like bundle, and actually I just have them all included, then that's gonna, again, they're looking for mind share, not for me to, they're not competing for my £10 a month. If that happens, that may, as we're starting to see, a little bit of a trend back to network style shows, like things which are story of the week. And I struggle with the idea of trends, because within the way that stories in film and TV are now, it's so diverse. Yeah. So there is going to be, big talent-led shows, which are probably going to be bigger than ever. Like with what Noah's doing, and that's going to have a really important place for people being able to find what they want to watch amongst it. But then I think there's going to be this return to, locally, like more limited budgets, because I do think they're going to come down, and I think that's probably a good thing. More and a little bit more comfort food type thing. So the workplace comedies, potentially the relatively benign murder mystery story of the week type shows. Love those. Like those types of things that in a heyday of network television we were really enjoying. So that's my, and then there's a whole other, AI and all of this kind of stuff, and what that's going to do for the industry. But I
did save you from any of my AI questions, by the way. So thank you for that. Noah, what about you? What's in the crystal ball for you a little bit?
It's a really hard question. I like, and this is not based on any reality proof or anything. I just have a feeling, purely internally, based on what we've been able to gather momentum behind more quickly, that the balance between an oversaturated TV market and an undervalued film market is going to shift back.
That's nice.
I think the return, something I've been really passionate about for a long time and want to see happen and hope will happen, is the return of mid-budget movies, and that, like, 90s thrillers, the idea of making films with genuine commercial potential rather than boom or bust. It feels like a very, very bifurcated industry at the moment between small independent and blockbuster. And I think the only way that the film industry can survive in a theatrical sense is by bridging that gap in the middle. So that's the thing that would be my optimistic hat on. I think that is the way that cinema, theatrical experience will be saved, quote unquote, is by people with money and people with some power and people who are financing films taking more risks on those middlers, those thrillers, those genre pieces that aren't tiny budget, aren't massive, and have genuinely international potential to reach audiences, to make people buy a ticket on a Friday night. And I hope that that's what, you know, the Barbenheimer of it all will teach people, rather than teaching them that it's only Christopher Nolan, Greta Gerwig, and a Mattel brand that, or a real piece of history that works. So I think there were a lot of lessons attempted to be learned from that weekend, specifically in that phenomenon. But it will be really interesting to see how those lessons are interpreted by the people who have the power to change things.
And I would add that my hope, because I enough people are talking about that phenomenon, or that potential phenomenon, that it's almost like willing itself into existence. I think that return of the mid-budget.
Yeah.
I think one way that it can happen is also being underpinned by better value television deals for these films as well. Because how theatrical moves forward is going to be interesting, and hopefully, you know, audiences are returning and continue to return and go to those types of films if they're given enough of the mind share marketing. But I think the role that television has to play in those types of movies, I think, is going to become more important. And already we see a lot of those types of deals being underpinned by international TV output deals. And that's okay. That's is what it is. And it's a potential opportunity.
Well, I'm excited because that just describes my next project. So happily, and hopefully I have my finger on the pulse. So we have a chat box in the bottom. While we have the wonderful Naysun and the wonderful Noah here, if you have any questions for them, please type it in. We will try to get to everyone in our last kind of like 10 minutes. So if you just, again, put it in the chat box, we will read it aloud. You mentioned something, and I just want to highlight it too, the Barbenheimer phenomenon. So for those who don't know, it's when like Barbie and Oppenheimer were out at the same time, and they got a lot of residual sales of people going to both. I love the idea that a film company would consciously put out genre supporting films together, knowing that folks like the experience of going to a cinema, they want different flavors. And both speak to kind of a zeitgeisty vibe of things happening. Do you think someone's going to consciously do that in the future rather than have it be serendipitous?
No.
Okay.
That would be my answer. I think it's just too hard. There are too many moving parts in programming films and TV, getting them into a cinema. Everything, exhibition windows. I think it's a total moment of serendipity and a moment in time that happened, and I don't think it was particularly intentional until it became intentional.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are patting themselves on the backs probably.
Oh my God, yeah.
They fell upon. So I think it's a very difficult thing to replicate. I'm sure that someone will try, and I'm sure that it will probably fail. Would be my
instinct. Well, we have some questions coming in, and this is one of my questions too, so I'm glad Maria asked it. What would Noah term, and I would also ask Naysun, as a mid-range budget? Can you guys put a rough figure on it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I realized when I said that it's a very different thing in a British sense than it is in an international or American sense. In an American world, I think mid-budget means somewhere between 15 and 25 to 30 million. I think that's there or thereabouts. And low budget would be anything under 10. But I think in a British sense, it's low budget would be under 5, and mid would be 5 to 15 or 5 to 12 even, and anything beyond that is quite big, high end.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that is how I would say it too, and I think the other part of it is also it's relative in a sense, in that I think people, as we're seeing with like the creator and others, that the story around there is like, oh no, actually we can make a $150 million film for $80 million. Oh, we can make a $50 million comedy for $20 million. Oh, you can make a $5 million horror for $2 million. So it's like taking what we have and seeing like, are there more efficient, effective ways of making them for a bit less without screwing anyone over in the process of making it.
Okay, that's really good. So, okay, so what do you think the future of the role of social media will be in relation to film and TV? Maybe even talking about that idea of what audiences want. Is there more power in the hands of the people because of social media?
I don't know. I mean, I guess there are different ways you could interpret that question in terms of, do you mean the depiction of social media in film and television, or how social media itself affects? I worry about the, the way that Netflix are changing to a model of internally advertised product placement as a means of financing films. You've seen it for years. Like, I remember the first time I really noticed it was the Fast and the Furious having Corona everywhere. But if you saw Creed 3 last year, it was like an ad for DAZN, which is a new boxing platform. The whole film was an ad for DAZN and Hennessy. But look, I also respect the fact that people have to find ways of getting films made. So if it was me and I'm a producer and it's the difference between making something and not, then I'm taking that deal every time. Social media, I don't know. To me, those worlds are relatively distinct. Obviously, VR will change things somewhat, how we will see, but I think it's like slightly too early to suggest that film will be changed as a form fundamentally by the advent of new media. I don't know.
Do you know, I watched Home Alone recently, and it is extraordinary how obvious the product placement is. And it's like a shot of Pepsi. And what do you think about social media before we move on?
Well, I think the question was clarified. How can small indies use social media to build an audience brand? I'm going to be the first to admit marketing is not my thing. in the realms of marketing, social media is incredibly low down. I'm on it, but I don't really use it anymore. But I mean, clearly, if you crack a virality formula, that's really something that can be really powerful, and can be used in the same way that underlying intellectual property or something like that can be used. And it is an important part of building your brand, and that is something that is valuable to be able to say to the world, well, this is who, even if it's a reductive form of it, this is who we are. So when someone comes to you and they Google and they're like, I understand who you are, I can put you in a box that makes me understand how to interact with you. So it's important, but I guess it sort of falls. I'm not sure how much it's changing or reinventing for small indies. I'm not sure that it necessarily is the tool that allows us to compete with bigger things. It still comes down to, the products that we're making, the things that we're developing, the ideas, the networking face to face. I think the pandemic showed us that there is still no substitute for the face to face version of this, and that's not going to be substituted by but for video games, the direct access to your audience, and also for things like self-published novels and all of that, the way that you can use social media to build a community is incredibly important. And that can be the difference between having a service business and being and creating real assets for yourself, like building something that means that you are making royalties every single month, and having social media and having that direct link to every ticket that someone buys, every game unit that someone buys, you're receiving a hefty proportion of it. Means that community building aspect is vital for independence, and it really transformed the independent video game community, the video development community.
And there's a really good example of, if anyone saw the TV show Miss Fisher, which was, I loved it, but that really built its audience out of the social media and online community, so much so that the audience got involved in the adaptation from Miss Fisher, the series, to the movie, which was pretty much all fan funded and internationally distributed. So the filmmakers were doing really well out of that, and the fans got a great experience of immersing themselves in the world.
I will also just, sorry, you just sparked something, that give a shout out to Angel Studios, who did a really effective, they came from a I think they're an evangelical Christian studio in the US who built because they had that inbuilt interest group.
Yeah.
They built out a direct connection with their audience, and they made, I can't remember the name of the film.
Freedom.
Yeah, Sound of Freedom.
Oh, well done, Judy.
They crowdfunded the marketing, I think around about 5 million for the marketing of their film. They did really smart activations for audience members to be able to gift cinema tickets to other people, and they really use that community to create a phenomenon of a film. It'll be really interesting to see if it's replicatable.
Yeah.
I suspect to an extent it is, but that will be, I suppose, remains to be seen, that it can be a model that keeps on going. But they use the power of community and social media really effectively.
That's a really great example. That's so interesting. A really great example. And I know we're running out of time, so we have one more question. And I might add to this, since I know you answered a little bit of it already. How do you find writing talent? And you've mentioned through agents. And I was just curious, do you guys work with writers? So if you saw a play you liked or read a book you liked and thought this person has talent, do you take the time to turn them into a screenwriter? Or
yes.
Yes, the answer would be yes. I mean, we're looking for good writing in everywhere all the time. We're sometimes thinking about optioning articles in the New Yorker or the Guardian. We're thinking of Zola was made out of a Twitter thread by A24. We're looking for stories in all of the places that you might look, and some of them that you wouldn't look necessarily. There have been Reddit threads over the last couple of years that have been the subject of $1 million bidding wars for the rights. It's a very much more democratized access point to storytelling now than it ever has been before. There are absolutely upsides and downsides of that, because in a more real world sense, there are upsides and downsides, but in the entertainment storytelling world, it's brilliant, because if you have access to a computer and a forum, you can write a story that can go many, many places. So we're looking everywhere. I mean, the traditional channels are still the most 90% of what we're doing, which is I spend a lot of my time talking to agents, going to see new plays, going to see short film showcases, watching new television, checking who were in the writers' rooms of shows that I liked, and meeting the younger people coming out of those shows, following up with writers that you've liked for years on end until an idea sparks with you. It's like a lot of that. So it's a lot of time spent chatting to people and creating a comfortable environment to bandy ideas back and forth, basically.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Naysun, Noah, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And everybody who's joined this. I think, Gemma, we're handing it over to you now.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and I really hope that you found it a valuable use of your time. I certainly found it extremely interesting. Please do visit our website, www.exponorth.co.uk, where you can look at our events section and you can sign up to our newsletter to be kept up to date with future events and news. Also on the website, we've got our video archive. Within there, you'll find lots of interesting content, as well as an inquiry form for specialist sector support. Make sure you connect with us on Facebook, X, also known as Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thank you, everybody, once again for joining us today. It was so amazing to see so many of you all.